Any questions?
How would you how would you like to see these privatization provisions? What would you do to ensure that even when they're privatized, for instance, OLG is going to have all these private companies running its gambling sections. How would you like to see your ability to have jurisdiction over them preserved? How would that be structured?
We'll just take a very simple one-sentence amendment to the Ombudsman Act or to any other act of Parliament, indicating that whenever an agency is decentralized from the provincial government, that it shall be considered as one of the institutions overseen by the Ombudsman. So the Ombudsman Act would kick in automatically. It's a simple solution, one that I proposed to the committee last week, and one which has been ruled out of order by the chair, unfortunately, due to technicalities. But that's the provision to save oversight. The problem is we find ourselves right now in a catch-22 situation because we're told by the chair that the amendment is out of order, but once the legislation has passed through Queen's Park, these agencies can be privatized or made semi-public through other instruments and legislation. So there won't be an opportunity to fit ourselves into the picture. So I'm hopeful that before the bill is passed that can be remedied so that we don't see an erosion in oversight. I mean, it's great to talk about the mush sector, which means catching up with other provinces, but it's a sad situation to see our oversight eroded, losing the ground that we already have. If you look at provincial agencies that operate in a commercial fashion, such as the OLG, MPAC, the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board, these are agencies independent of government where we've contributed quite substantively by investigating and making submissions or recommendations to government. So it's unfortunate that we're in a situation now being on the eve of regressing.
Pourquoi le gouvernement accepterait aujourd'hui d'étendre votre pouvoir d'enquête alors qu'il a toujours refusé de le faire?
Écoutez, ça fait 37 ans que le bureau de l'Ombudsman fait valoir l'argument que le secteur moche doit tomber dans notre compétence, que le mandat doit être révisé pour pouvoir rendre ce secteur-là redevable. Et puis, c'est un effort qu'on reprend chaque année. Je garde un esprit optimiste que possiblement il va y avoir un changement de direction dans le futur.
Quel contexte? Est-ce que le contexte se prête à ça?
C'est parce qu'on a au-delà de 2500 plaintes dans le secteur moche. C'est un secteur qui consomme énormément de ressources, 30 milliards de dollars, au-delà de 30 milliards de dollars. Puis ce sont des fonds publics. C'est pour cette raison qu'il doit y avoir une plus grande surveillance. What I answered in French is that I remain optimist, even after 37 years, that the government will redress this issue and allow Ontario to catch up to the rest of the provinces. I had a telephone conversation yesterday with the Premier, who certainly appeared to have an open mind and was asking me many questions and wanted to know what my concerns were. So as long as that door is open, I remain optimist.
Monsieur Marin, comment expliquer une augmentation de près de 30% des plaintes l'année dernière?
C'est difficile à donner une explication scientifique. Moi, je crois que le bureau jouit d'une dimension publique, d'une reconnaissance publique. Je crois qu'on a une bonne réputation pour livrer des résultats. Et je crois que pour ces deux raisons-là, je crois qu'on a vu une hausse des plaintes. Why is it that complaints are up by almost 30%? I don't have a scientific answer for that, except that we enjoy a very healthy public profile and we have a good reputation for delivering results. Beyond that, I have no particular crystal ball that tells me why they're up 30%. The one area I do want to talk about, and I briefly alluded to it in my opening, and I've attached an addendum to the annual report on the SIU. The SIU results this year are a mixed bag. There's some positive things happening. I was astounded, quite frankly, to discover that the cases where the SIU was notified since our last report have doubled. So that means there was a double of instances where the police notified the SIU that there were serious injury or death. Now, are we to assume that there were double the amount of deaths and serious injury, or is it that the police are finally starting to do their job and report these incidences the way they should? I think it's the latter, which makes me wonder what's been happening for the last 2 decades of operations of the SIU. How many cases have gone unnotified, cases where the police are not meeting their legal obligation? But I guess going from 57 to 101 cases of notification is encouraging, that the police are finally living up to their legal obligations. As far as the SIU itself, there is a rule in place since our first report that they cannot don police paraphernalia. Because as you will recall, our first report found that SIU investigators were wearing police ties and badges and so on, rings, attending the scenes of police incidents. So there's a rule in place that prohibiting investigators from wearing police apparatus on this when they're conducting their work. We discovered that one such investigator was wearing a ring recently, and that investigator was suspended. And I spoke to the director of the SIU, who then conducted his internal investigation, found there were 3 more wearing rings. So there seems to be a bit of a police ring fetish going on at the SIU. I'm not sure how to deal with that. Perhaps install metal detectors at the door and screen SIU directors for metal devices, or perhaps even come up with an SIU ring. I'm not sure the solution is, but I was very pleased to see the director take prompt action on that. As far as the addendum that I showed you, Director Ian Scott has been very aggressive in pursuing cases of bad cooperation by the police, but he's not always successful in getting answers to his letters. Here's a case, March 7, 2012. 40 bullets discharged by the police by a total of 5 police officers. It's quite an interesting case. And the director of the SIU wrote complaining to the chief of police of the late notification of the SIU, over an hour and a quarter. Talked about the lack of cooperation of witness officers, the lack of cooperation of a liaison officer, that the scene and evidence was not properly protected. It's been over 3 months. He has never heard back from the chief of police of Halton. So I think that this is a taste of the kind of issues that are out there still with the police services. They are notifying more, but instances of cooperation are not being investigated properly, and they're not being accounted to the SIU. And that's why we need consequences in the act. Another further point I want to make on another case, and to me this is probably the biggest revelation in this year's annual report, is the fact that the Ministry of Transportation has been creating these ghost files of driver's licenses. When a driver is stopped, he's asked to produce his driver's license and he doesn't have it. The Ministry of Transportation creates a ghost driver's license for the record. And the intent is that eventually the real driver's license and the ghost one are reconciled. That's not happening. We have tens of thousands of drivers in Ontario on our roads today with 2 versions of the driver's license. A ghost one of the Ministry of Transportation and the real one. And because they're not reconciled, it means that drivers who have offenses where they're prohibited from driving may be on our roads today with impaired driving convictions when they're supposed to not be driving or prohibited for another reason. And what we discovered is the Ministry of Transportation does not have a systematic way of reconciling these files. It's 36,000 files a year. Now think about it. For how many years? How many tens or possibly hundreds of thousands of drivers do we have out there driving, and they appear legitimate on the face of it, yet they are a threat to public safety? And that is an issue which needs to be fixed.
Comments about Orange, and that you'd received 17 complaints since 2005, but you had no power to investigate them. Do you really think you could have prevented what we saw at Orange if you'd had that authority to investigate these?
I guess we'll never know the answer to that. But one of the roles of the Ombudsman is to serve as a barometer before tragedy of some kind strikes, financial tragedy, human tragedy. So for example, today I'm telling you about 36,000 per year driver's license that are not reconciled properly, where drivers that are a risk to public safety are out on the road. And you probably never heard about it before. I haven't either. But because of our implication, it has a way to galvanize action in the bureaucracy. So I can't tell you, Orange scandal would not have happened with our oversight, but I can tell you is it may not have happened, and we may have been able to barometer what was going on before it exploded and mushroomed. Now, the irony with Orange, of course, is that Bill 50 provides for formidable ways of keeping Orange to account with one big flaw. I still don't have jurisdiction over Orange. So, and it's an issue that I've raised with the government, and I've been told that it's not in the cards. And you have to ask yourself what possible public policy reason would be to continue to protect Orange against us having the ability to scrutinize its operations. Can you find a better example of a public body that just like a fish is rotting from the head down? I mean, how much more do you want to go? What more do you need? Criminal investigations, frauds, all types of allegations of irregularities and improprieties, spending over $100 million, $150 million a year. So that's why when you look at the Fortress Hospital here and you look at the Orange helicopter, this represents the defensiveness that we've seen in protecting both hospitals and Orange. You know, when you look at the MUSH sector, you look at Orange, it's very much a oversight NIMBY, not in my backyard. And every time we start talking about bringing oversight to these troubled branches that are right outside government, we see the PR machines, well-oiled PR machines get into action to really say that it's not required. But if you look at the hundreds of billions of dollars that go to these broader government sectors, it's time for us to bring scrutiny.
Can I ask you about the Halton police chief? Is there any mechanism, do you have a mechanism, does the SIU have a mechanism to force the police chief to respond to your report?
Oh, right now it's just, yeah, there is a mechanism. It's called public shaming. Unfortunately, there should be consequences, and that's what we were arguing for in our second report, and that's why I produced the letter. Last time I produced a chart, you will recall, the 227 such letters that Ian Scott had written to the police, and he'd received 20 responses. And at the time, reporters were asking for examples of the letters. Well, I tabled one today. This is serious stuff. It's serious stuff because the police is unanswerable to anybody. And that's why we recommended that there should be an offense created, that any police officer who does not cooperate fully with the SIU is guilty of an offense, including the chief, punishable by jail. Then you would see responses to letters, I can guarantee you. But right now, it depends on the amount of public scrutiny. The Ottawa chief of police said after the second report, oh, the SIU director deserves a response because he's a taxpayer. It kind of misses the point. So I indicated that a response that's merely pro forma would simply be a waste of a stamp. You got to just acknowledge receipt of your letter. Like, what are you going to do about it?
You talked about Orange earlier. The provincial auditor has already, delivered a fairly scathing report on Orange. What could you bring to that the examination of the air ambulance system that the provincial auditor didn't? I mean, why would it be necessary for you to have scrutiny over them when the provincial auditor has already done that?
Well, right now what I'm saying is looking forward. As we're making changes to the system, why not provide for the same kind of oversight that we provide for the provincial government? The Auditor General and I work in tandem. He has his areas of focus, but so do I. We're not mutually exclusive. If we're mutually exclusive, we wouldn't coexist provincially. So what I'm saying is bring the same level of oversight that the province provides to Orange. It's been working well since this office came into existence in 1975. There's no reason why it couldn't work well with the new Orange, just like we work with the OLG and we work with MPAC and so on with the Auditor General.
You mentioned that in your message at the beginning about concerns around how what the impact of funding cuts could be, budget cuts on citizens' ability to navigate through the bureaucracy. Could you expand a little bit on that? What's the worry that somehow budget cuts could cause problems for ordinances?
You know, the role of the Ombudsman in many ways is to humanize government. When you're making cold, hard decisions in your glass tower in downtown Toronto, you may not always appreciate the consequences of your decision. And so the role of the Ombudsman is to sensitize people in the bureaucracy the impact of their decisions. And we all know and we accept the need for austerity, but decisions have to be made in a fair way, based on criteria, based on reasonableness, and that is really the function of the Ombudsman, is there to help the government understand the ramifications of their decisions.
So I'm still not clear on what your concern is.
Well, my concern is that there may be cuts that are made in an arbitrary fashion that cause suffering that shouldn't happen. So we intend to vigorously monitor the kinds of cutbacks and cuts that happen to make sure they're done in an even-handed fashion, that they're done with compassion, and that they're done with full transparency.
On your you've done previous reports on MPAC and criminal injuries compensation board, things like that. How are you finding? Have you revisited those agencies recently, or how are those agencies doing?
Well, we've seen a major drop in complaints about MPAC, for example. We do have a few stories in the report about instances where problems still exist. If you look at the end of the report, there are individual cases where we've investigated MPAC and resolved cases, but it's by no means as deep-rooted it used to be. That's why you'll see the decline as well. If you look at past reports, these are all agencies where the volume has declined considerably since we've done our systemic work. So that I'm pleased to report. And you'll see, however, that Hydro One is still a work in progress. We talk in the report about a case where a citizen was overbilled by $20,000 since 1997, and Hydro One was refusing to compensate them the full amount until we intervene. There's another case about Hydro One where, because of faulty wiring, someone was paying an exaggerated bill as well. So, I mean, these organizations are big bureaucracies. Problems happen in bureaucracies, and that's where we're there to help put a hard back in government. Thank you very much.